Hey everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and continuing our series on rifle drills, we have the holdover drill. When teaching rifle classes, one of the first things I see fail is knowledgeably holding over based on your zero, based on the distance we're shooting the target from. Usually it happens when there's another task that is taking priority in the brain. So if a shooter is being introduced to a drill or a scenario they're not familiar with, the holdover is usually the first thing they forget about. So if I'm having them shoot a drill, like, whatever drill, generally what I see, and this happens a lot in low light classes, when I have students work on transitions, or even in daylight classes when I have them work on transitions, or I have them work on going from standing to kneeling to prone to standing, something that's going to task stack in their mind. Or I could have them transitioning from target to target, or working three-dimensional targets, or working a scenario where prior to turning around and facing downrange, they have no idea which targets are shoot targets and which targets are no shoot targets. So the more complicated it is, the more likely holdover is going to be the first thing that goes out the window. Sometimes it's not a big deal, depending on distance we're shooting from and the zero that's on the gun and the student's inherent skill that he brought with him to the class. But holdover is a very real thing. It's more applicable and more potentially bad on a rifle than it is on a red dot handgun. But this is a drill I like to shoot because it helps me reinforce being able to knowledgeably incorporate holdover into the distance I'm shooting from based on how accurate I'm trying to be, based on the time I feel or I know I have available. So in a scenario, there's generally not a time limit. You're trying to run it as fast as possible. In a drill, time, distance, and accuracy are the best way to objectively measure skill. So if I'm setting up a target, I'm saying, hey, you got to hit A zone, which for me is a 4x6 box, we're going to shoot it from these distances. If I just do that, most people remember their holdovers. If I throw another wrench in the works, or if I make the par time a little bit unrealistic for that shooter's skill set, holdover is probably going to go out the window. Another thing is, have you knowledgeably practiced and printed the holdover for your rifle based on your optic height and your zero distance? For this drill, I'm using my Sage Dynamics edition from Sons of Liberty Gunworks, which is on a Unity mount, and it is a 50-yard confirmed at 200. So some people say 50/200. That's not technically correct. That's the shared point blank of the round. What I do in my zeroing process is I get it printing sub MOA, if the gun's possible, at 50 yards. And then I choose a target at 200 yards and I make final adjustments. Generally what I use is an 8-inch plate at 200 yards and I make adjustments, or 8-inch target, and I'll use like a B8 or something at 200 yards, because 200 yards on a red dot is a high order for a lot of extreme precision, depending on any number of possible complications, being how efficiently you can get the gun back down to target availability to being able to shoot to 200 yards, because some people can't. That's why 25-yard zero, one of the reasons 25-yard zero is still so possible is because most indoor ranges, or there is an indoor range near you that can offer you that distance when it comes to zeroing your rifle. But at 200 yards, if I can hit an 8-inch steel plate consistently, or if I can print inside a B8, say 9-ring at 200 yards, I'd consider that to be a zero gun, especially for a gun that has no magnification. Now, in a magnified optic, the conversation is a little bit different. I'm looking for a higher degree of precision, but my magnified guns, my 1-4s, my 1-6s, my 1-8s, I zero all of those at 100 yards. This gun, just using it for this zero because the holdover matter, or for this drill, because the holdover matters a little bit more for the purposes we're talking about up close. However, this is also an excellent drill to shoot for precision guns further back. So when I shoot my DMR type rifles, or if I shoot my magnified optic guns, I may start this drill at 50 and then work my way back as far as I can go. The range I'm using right now, Ross Lake Plantation, Modern Outdoor Adventures range, I can shoot from 0 out to 250 yards. So it's a drill I do for that. Might shoot on paper, might shoot on steel. When I do shoot on steel, and steel's great for distance because you don't have to walk down range and look at holes in the paper or use a spotting scope, I want to use the smallest steel as possible. So I go with like A-zone size, or I go with the small pie plates, just to keep it realistic. If you're still learning your holdovers, there's a great way to really reinforce them in practice. I'll take my target and I'll set it up, and I'll get some blue painter's tape, and I'll get my scoring zone. I'm going to shoot a 3x5 card or a 1-inch circle. I like to do this on a 1-inch circle at the closer distances because it really gives me the math I need. And I'm going to aim, I'm going to hold my red dot exactly on that 1-inch circle, and I'm going to pull the trigger, and I'm going to see where my bullet hits. And that gives me an idea of how high I need to hold. I'm going to get that in my mind. I'm going to bring the rifle up. I'll break a second shot. And if I hit the one in circle, that's my spot. I'll then put a piece of blue painter's tape on that spot so I can snap into the rifle. And when I see my reticle on the tape, I know I'm holding over at the proper height and I can break the shot. I'm going to drill that. Then I'm going to take it away from myself. So now I intuitively know, based on the scoring zone I'm shooting, or hopefully the anatomy of the target, I know where to hold to get the hit that I want. And then I'm going to do the same process as I move back and back and back and back and back. So eventually my holdover becomes more intuitive. It's never going to be completely precise because we're not machines, but I would rather hit high in the A zone accidentally than low in the A zone accidentally because I didn't hold over properly. And some people, the way they approach holdovers is I'll just hold high. And that works till you get back to a certain distance, depending on which zero you're using. So the application of this drill is pretty straightforward. You can use, like I do, the 4x6 A zone or a 3x5 card or a 1 inch circle, although the 1 inch circle gets a little unrealistic when you get back to like 10, 15, 20, 25 yards. The best way to do this drill requires you to have a range that allows some degree of free movement. You're going to start at right there next to the target, and you're just going to walk away from it, and you're just going to stop, and then you'll turn around and be at a somewhat unknown distance, and you got to break your shot. So if I know my range is 25 yards, I know what 0 is and I know what 25 is, but I may not be specific about what, say I stop and I turn around, I'm like, oh, I'm at 7 yards, but I may not be able to accurately know that depending on how the range is set up. This works better with outdoor ranges than indoor ranges. Most indoor ranges don't allow movement anyway. Another way that you can shoot this that's incredibly aggravating is you use a 3x5 card, and every time you move back, you fold the card. So the further back you go, the smaller your point of impact goes. And this is not something that you might use for 3 yards to 25. You may only go back to 10 yards with this and go back a yard at a time if you really got the time, ammunition, and patience. I generally do it from 3 back to 10, 15, 20, maybe 25, because every time I fold that 3x5 card, it's getting half as large, depending on which way I set it up, which way I fold it. Long ways is the most aggravating. Lengthways is a little bit more, or height wise is a little bit more realistic. So I break my first shot, all I gotta do is hit the 3x5 card. Then I fold it. I move back. Now my target has gotten smaller, but my holdover, depending on what zero I'm using, might not be as extreme. Because I know at 3 yards, my holdover is significantly more extreme than it is at 10, 15, 20, 25. You can put a time limit on it, or you can leave a time limit off of it. Shooting it on time limit is kind of fun too. Best idea is placing it in some other type of scoring zone, like in an A zone for the targets that I use. So even if you don't hit your holdover precisely, you have an idea of how accurate that hit would have been on a more maybe reasonable scoring zone. So this is just another drill. I have to shoot this one cold, usually from 3 back to 25, although, like I said, I'll use it for precision rifle purposes as well, changing things up. The 3x5 card, folding it every time you get a hit, or folding it every time you move back, is super aggravating. Some people I've seen run it the other way. They start off with a really small point of aim, and when they move forward, they give themselves a little more room to work with so they can shoot faster. I kind of like making it increasingly unrealistic as I move back to really hold myself to an almost unrealistic standard, because I'd rather be able to shoot super precise from 25 than not, especially when we're talking in holdover and trying to do it fast. Once I start introducing a par time, I generally try to use par times that are just outside of consistent repeatability to really force myself to move forward. Doing that for a lot of years, there are par times that I used to not be able to consistently get that I now regularly get because I held myself to that standard for so long. Eventually, you run into the law of diminishing returns and you just can't mechanically, physically get any faster. But most shooters aren't there yet. So this is another drill, low round count, depending on how many distances you incorporate into it or how you work your scoring zone. And I found the blue painter's tape trick to really help students learn intuitively where their holdover is. And then when you take the tape away from them, they're going to remember that physical reference point that they have on the target anatomy, and they're going to get really close, if not exactly where they need to get for their holdover. I'm Eric Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.